3 weeks after I moved in, my dog died. Not from old age, not from an accident. Someone entered my yard while I was at work and left a bite so deep, Dash never woke up again. I thought I came here to heal after the divorce, to rebuild, but fences don't keep out monsters, especially the kind that wears a hoodie, sits across the street every morning and smiles at you like he knows something you don't. I'm 30 and trying to get my life together after a rough divorce. I just bought this house, nothing fancy but a decent little place in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Honestly, I was just looking for peace. I wasn't expecting anything more. After everything that went down in my last chapter of life, I wanted a fresh start, a place where I could be alone, do my own thing, and just focus on fixing myself up. I didn't need drama, didn't need friends. All I needed was a little bit of space and a roof over my head. I've always been the type of guy to keep to himself. I'd wave to neighbors from the driveway, maybe exchange a few words here and there, but that's about it. I didn't want to get too involved. And for the first few weeks, everything went fine. My new neighbors, Tim and Linda Brown, seemed like they kept to themselves too. I'd catch them in their yard sometimes, but they mostly kept to their side of the fence, and I did the same. But it didn't take long before I started noticing things. Then there was their son, Tyler. Now, Tyler was different. He was 23, and I knew right away he had that kind of troublemaker vibe. I'd see him around more often than I'd like, hanging around the house, sometimes leaning on his car in front of mine, staring at me when I walked out the door. At first, I thought he was just the quiet, brooding type. I didn't give him much thought. But then the pranks started. It wasn't much at first. Some flowers from my garden were dug up. A few odd things moved around in my yard. Stuff that could be written off as a kid being bored. But it didn't take long for things to escalate. One day, I went to start my car and noticed it had been keyed. Yeah, that kind of thing. At first, I just assumed it was some random vandal, but when I saw Tyler standing across the street just staring at me with that grin on his face, something in my gut told me otherwise. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was just overthinking it. But then I started to notice him more. Every time I went outside, there he was, watching, lurking, waiting. And that was when the real problem started. One afternoon, I came home from work and I found my dog Dash limping. He was my only companion in this new town, and he'd always been the good kind of troublemaker himself, always running around and causing a mess, but in the cutest way possible. Dash was my lifeline, my little buddy after everything that happened in the divorce. I thought maybe he'd gotten into something while I was gone, but then I noticed the blood on his paw and it didn't look like an accident. I took him to the vet and they said it was a bad bite, deep enough to cause some serious damage. I couldn't figure it out. But when I got back home, there was Tyler again standing across the street looking at me with that same unsettling smile. I asked him if he had seen anything, but he just shrugged it off, saying he hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. Still, I kept my suspicions low. It wasn't until later that night, after Dash had started acting more lethargic, that I found out just how wrong I was. Dash died in his sleep that night. The vet's office couldn't determine what exactly had caused it, but I knew in my gut that something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling that the bite, whatever had caused it, was a lot more serious than it seemed. And that's when I really started putting things together. The pranks, the weird looks, and now my dog dead. It wasn't just some bored kid acting out anymore. It felt personal. Tyler had been causing these problems, but I didn't have the proof to say anything. The police wouldn't care. Without evidence, I was just some guy making baseless accusations. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized Tyler wasn't just a nuisance. He was dangerous. I couldn't just sit around and let him keep messing with my life. I had to do something. But the problem was, I didn't have anything concrete. No proof. Nothing that would make the cops believe me. When I called them about the dog, they took the report but never really followed up. It was just another case they'd toss aside. I started watching him. Tyler seemed to be everywhere, on his porch, hanging out with his buddies, watching me. I'd catch him looking at me through the window sometimes, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for the right moment to strike again. But I still didn't have anything solid. I didn't have that smoking gun, and without it I knew I was powerless. I wasn't one to make a scene, but I had to do something. I needed proof. So I went to the hardware store the next day and picked up some security cameras. Nothing fancy, just enough to see who was coming and going around my house, hoping that just maybe I could catch something. If I could see who was behind all this, if I could get a shot of him doing something, maybe then I could finally get some action. But for now, all I could do was wait. And I hated it. Every day that passed, I felt more and more trapped in my own house. I couldn't go out without worrying about what was going to be destroyed next. Tyler's games were getting out of hand, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep pretending everything was normal. This wasn't the life I wanted, but it was the one I was stuck with. Until I could prove something, I was just another guy trying to make it through the mess that had been forced on him. The first few days with the cameras set up were tense, and honestly, they didn't help my peace of mind. I checked the footage obsessively, scanning it for any sign that could confirm my suspicions. Every time I heard a sound outside, I'd rush to check, only to find nothing, just the empty street and the quiet hum of the neighborhood. But it didn't feel quiet to me anymore. It felt like a ticking time bomb. I was waiting for the next incident, and I didn't know when it would happen. It wasn't long before I caught my first break. I was in the kitchen one night, half watching TV, half scrolling through my phone, when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside. I froze. I didn't even need to check the camera feed. My gut told me exactly what was going on. I grabbed my phone, pulled up the footage, and sure enough, there he was, Tyler, sneaking around my yard in the dead of night. I watched, heart pounding, as he moved toward the garden. He knelt down and pulled something out of his jacket, a small knife, the same one I'd seen him use to slash my tires weeks ago. He bent down and began cutting my flowers, the ones I'd painstakingly planted after the first round of damage. I don't know why, but that small act, destroying the last bit of beauty I had left in this place, was the last straw. I felt my blood start to boil. I had evidence now. I had something to take to the cops. I wasn't just imagining things anymore. I grabbed the phone and dialed the police. My hands were shaking, but I tried to steady my voice as I told them what I'd seen. I wasn't sure how they'd respond, but I had something concrete now. Proof. Something they couldn't ignore. Right, wrong. They weren't impressed. I got the usual "we'll look into it" routine. A couple of officers came by, looked at the footage, nodded a few times, and promised they'd take a closer look at Tyler's activities. But honestly, the way they acted, I knew it wasn't going anywhere. They weren't taking this seriously. It wasn't until I pulled up the footage again and started showing them specific instances that I realized how indifferent they were. The footage wasn't as clear as I hoped. Tyler had his face turned most of the time, and the quality wasn't great either. The cops seemed uninterested, brushing it off as nothing more than neighborhood kids being kids or harmless pranks. That's when I lost it. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was the whole damn year of feeling like I was being walked on. Maybe it was the raw pain of losing Dash. Maybe it was just seeing how everyone else was brushing me off. But I couldn't keep it in anymore. I was furious. I didn't have any other choice but to go all in. I had to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't going to let this slip through the cracks again. I started documenting everything. Every incident, no matter how small, every broken window, every tire slashed, every single word he said when I confronted him. I started putting together a timeline, making notes, keeping a record. And as the days went by, I realized something. Tyler was smart about it. He knew how to cover his tracks. Every time he messed with me, he did it in ways that made it hard to prove. But now, with the cameras, I could catch him. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I began to think that if I could just get one more piece of solid evidence, maybe then they'd finally take me seriously. But every day felt like an uphill battle. Every time I went outside, I had to brace myself. I had to keep one eye on the yard, one eye on the street, always half expecting Tyler to pop up. The guy was relentless, and honestly, it wore on me. It wore on my nerves, wore on my patience. I couldn't even sit on my porch for 5 minutes without feeling like I was being watched. I had become hyper-aware of everything. The way Tyler's truck was parked across the street, the way his friends would hang out on his lawn while he sat on the porch, staring straight at my front door. And then one night, it happened. I came home late from work, around midnight. I was dead tired, ready to crash into bed and sleep for the first time in days without worrying about what might happen next. I hadn't seen Tyler outside, so I thought maybe, just maybe, I had a chance at a peaceful night. But as I walked up my driveway, I noticed something strange. There was a ladder leaning against my house. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart skipped a beat. I knew exactly what that meant. Tyler had been inside. He'd somehow gotten into my house when I wasn't home. I felt a chill run down my spine. I had to know for sure. I sprinted up the porch steps, pushed open the door, and checked around the house. Sure enough, nothing was missing, but things were off. My kitchen had been ransacked, cabinets left open, a few things knocked over. He'd been here. Tyler had been inside my house while I was gone. I felt violated. I didn't waste any more time. I ran to the camera footage and checked the angles I had on the front and side of the house. There it was. Tyler slipping through the window, his face hidden under a hoodie, sneaking around like he owned the place. I could barely breathe as I watched him move around the living room, touching things, moving things. I was frozen in place. This wasn't just a prank anymore. This was stalking. This was breaking and entering. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. He was taking things way too far. I called the police again, this time not just about vandalism. No, this was bigger than that. It was a violation of my home, my space. I demanded that they do something about it. When the cops showed up, they didn't look impressed at first. They saw the footage, heard me talk about Tyler's history of harassment, and they shrugged it off. Again, they told me they'd look into it. But I could tell they weren't really doing anything. I felt like I was begging them to take me seriously, but every time they just gave me the same excuse. No hard evidence, Jake. I was tired of hearing it. Then I did something I should have done a long time ago. I took the footage, the journal, everything I had, and I walked straight into the police station. I wasn't leaving until someone took me seriously. I waited for hours, sitting there, getting more and more pissed off with every minute that passed. I wasn't going to let Tyler win. Finally, a detective agreed to meet with me. I laid out all the evidence I had, showing him the videos, explaining everything that had been going on. I made it clear, this wasn't just petty nonsense anymore. This was dangerous, and if they didn't do something, it would get worse. I needed their help. Finally, for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was getting through to someone. The detective said they'd take a closer look and promised to investigate Tyler further. It wasn't much, but it was something. As I left the station, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I still had a long road ahead of me, but at least now I had a shot. I had proof, and I had the police on my side. It felt good, like, for the first time, maybe I was going to get justice. But even with all that, I knew Tyler wasn't done. The worst wasn't over. Not yet. And I had no idea just how far he was willing to go. The days following my visit to the police station were strangely quiet, almost too quiet. It felt like everything had calmed down, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was just the calm before the storm. I knew Tyler wasn't finished with me. He wasn't the type to back down easily, and now that I'd gone to the cops, I figured it was only a matter of time before he came back with something even worse. I stayed vigilant. Every time I left the house, I checked the cameras, hoping to catch something on tape. I became obsessive about it, watching the footage like a hawk. Every car that passed my house felt like a potential threat. Every shadow seemed like a person lurking. I couldn't relax. The fear was still there, gnawing at me, even though Tyler was supposedly being investigated. But as the weeks went on, nothing happened, at least nothing obvious. I kept seeing Tyler around, but he didn't do anything overly suspicious. He'd stare at me from across the street like always, but the pranks seemed to stop. My yard stayed intact. My car stayed untouched. It was almost like he was waiting for something. Or maybe he was biding his time, knowing that I had set the wheels in motion with the cops. I tried to get back to a normal routine, but it wasn't easy. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I'd get up in the morning and go about my day, But every time I looked out the window, I half expected to see Tyler standing there, plotting his next move. The anxiety was draining. I wanted my life back. I wanted to go outside and not feel like I was in constant danger. Then one night everything changed. It was late. Around 11 p.m. I was sitting on the couch, flicking through channels, trying to unwind. My mind wasn't exactly at ease, but I was doing my best to pretend like it was. That's when I heard the sound. A knock. Soft at first, almost too quiet to be heard over the TV, but unmistakable once it registered in my brain. My heart skipped a beat. I froze. I didn't know who it could be at this hour, but I wasn't about to answer it without checking first. I pulled myself to my feet and crept quietly toward the door, peeking through the peephole. My stomach dropped. It was Tyler. He was standing on my front porch, a smug grin on his face, holding something in his hand. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but I didn't care. He was here. After all this time, after everything I'd gone through, he was standing on my doorstep like he owned the place. I backed away from the door, trying to stay calm. My heart was pounding, but I knew I couldn't just ignore it. This was it. This was the moment I had been dreading, the confrontation I'd been steeling myself for. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police, keeping my voice steady even though my pulse was racing. Someone's on my property. It's the guy I've been reporting. I need someone here now. I didn't hang up. I stayed by the door, trying to listen for any noise outside. I heard him mumbling to himself, but I couldn't make out the words. A few minutes later, he slid something under the door. I took a deep breath before opening it carefully, my heart still thumping in my chest. There on the floor was an envelope. I picked it up, hands shaking, and ripped it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper scrawled with a message: "Say goodbye to your house next." I stood there, staring at the note, my blood running cold. I knew Tyler was dangerous, but this felt like a real threat. It wasn't just a prank anymore. It was personal. I didn't wait. I called the police again, this time frantic. They promised someone would be there soon, but the minutes felt like hours. I couldn't sit still. I paced around the house, peeking through the window, checking the front door, waiting for some sign that Tyler had left. Finally, the sirens wailed in the distance, and I breathed a sigh of relief. The cops arrived in minutes, but by then Tyler was gone. He wasn't in sight. I handed them the note, and they immediately took it into evidence. The officer took my statement, asking me about everything that had happened since Dash's death. I felt a sick knot in my stomach as I told them everything again: how Tyler had been tormenting me, how I'd been trying to get help for months, how this note was the final straw. This time it felt different. The cops were actually listening. "We'll keep an eye on things here for now," the officer said, his tone more serious than before. "We'll increase patrols in the area, keep the cameras running, and keep the evidence coming." For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. It wasn't much, but it was something. The next few days were quieter. Tyler didn't show up. No more notes. No more weird phone calls. I half expected something to happen every time I stepped out the door, but for once it didn't. The quiet made me feel uneasy, though. It wasn't peace, it was the calm before the storm. And then a few days later I got the call. It was the detective I'd spoken to earlier. "Jake," he said, "we've got him. We arrested Tyler Brown tonight." My heart skipped. "What for?" "For a break-in," he replied. He tried to break into another neighbor's house down the street. And when we searched his place, we found evidence linking him to other incidents, your house included. We're building a case. Over the next few weeks, the police continued their investigation. They interviewed Tyler, but of course, he denied everything. His mother, Linda, as expected, backed him up, claiming it was all just a misunderstanding. But the evidence was piling up. The cameras, the notes, the reports, I knew this time it was different. Tyler's confession was both shocking and in some ways not surprising. He told the police that the reason he'd targeted me, why he'd been so relentless in his harassment, was because of Dash. He'd always hated the sound of Dash's barking. Every time my dog would bark, Tyler would lose his temper. He even admitted to standing outside my house late at night, throwing rocks to provoke Dash into barking, just so he could feel some twisted sense of control. When Dash would get loud, Tyler would get angry. It made his blood boil. The anger in me came rushing back, but now it was mixed with disbelief. How could someone's jealousy be so twisted? How could something as small as a dog's barking drive someone to do this? I didn't know what to feel anymore. I just knew that Tyler had crossed a line that would never be erased. Tyler was convicted of harassment, vandalism, animal cruelty, and several other charges, including breaking and entering. His mother, Linda, sat behind him, glaring at me the entire time, her expression still one of denial. But she couldn't change the facts. Tyler was going to prison, and I was finally able to put this chapter of my life to rest. But as I walked away from the courthouse, I realized that the scars from this experience would stay with me for a long time. The house that had once felt like a fresh start now felt like a battle zone. But the truth was, I'd fought for it. I'd fought for my peace, for my safety, and for my sense of security. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was mine. And it was enough. In the end, I learned that sometimes you have to fight for your peace. You have to stand up for yourself, even when the world seems stacked against you. I thought I could live quietly, stay out of trouble, and just enjoy a simple life. But Tyler showed me that sometimes things aren't that simple. And even when it feels like you're losing, you still have a choice. Maybe things will never be the same. But at least now, I know I can protect what's mine. And that's a lesson I won't forget.